Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northfield. My name is Mary Dorr, and I have enjoyed the pleasures of being part of this community since 2005. UUFN is an inclusive community that nurtures spiritual and intellectual growth and fosters ethical and social responsibility. If you are a visitor, either on-site or online, we are glad you are with us, and we invite you to stay after the service to get acquainted. We welcome your questions and look forward to getting to know you. Later in the service today, we will take our Share the Plate offering as a way to care for the wider world. Each month, we share our offering with an organization that embodies UU values in the world. This month's recipient is Makoche Ikikupi. From their website, and I quote, Makoche Ikichupi, meaning land recovery, is a project of reparative justice on Dakota land in Minnesota, Makoche, Minnesota. The project seeks to bring some of our relatives home, reestablish our spiritual and physical relationship with our homeland, and ensure the ongoing existence of our people. Our cultural survival depends on it. During the offering later, you may put cash or a check in the basket or donate online from our website, uunorthfield.org. If you are paying your pledge by check, please note in the memo line either capital pledge or annual pledge. There will be instructions on the screen also today during the offertory time. If there are children in attendance today, there's an activity table in the back of the sanctuary with things on it for them to do. I call your attention to the announcements in your order of service and also a weekly email. There you'll find more information about the following. There will be campfire chats coming up at UUFN Fire Circle, 7 p.m. on October 9th and October 30th. The next Get Acquainted gathering will be held at Oddfellows Park right after the service on October 13th. An all-congregation workshop will be held this Friday. It will be facilitated by Mid-America Regional staff. Sacred Circle registration is now open. Again, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northfield.
Hey, Our opening words today are the recently approved UUFN Land Acknowledgement Statement. We, the members of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northfield, acknowledge the genocide, stolen land, and forced removal of the Wapakute and other bands of the Dakota people, who for centuries were stewards of the land on which UUFN is located. We commit to building the mindfulness necessary to disengage from participation in the ongoing and unjust legacy of colonialism. We recognize contemporary Dakota people live in our midst and are actively involved in honoring and preserving their ancient wisdom, knowledge, and culture. With this acknowledgement, we as a community commit to help heal this injustice by hearing stories of this place and those who have lived here for generations, to learn about Indigenous history, and to advocate for just public policy that impacts Indigenous people. We pledge to take action to support Indigenous peoples as we live together in Minnesota Makoche, Minnesota.
The flaming chalice is a symbol of Unitarian Universalism. Each Sunday when we gather, we bring this symbol to life together. Please join me in speaking the words for the lighting of the chalice. Let us open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Let us open our minds to learn what is true. Let us open our hearts to love one another. Good job. Please rise in body or spirit for our opening hymn, number 360, Here We Have Gathered. Let us move into our time of centering and connection. Spirit of life, draw near. Help us to become more aware of a greater love shimmering within and among us. Will you take a breath with me? In the presence of a love that holds us all, we use our chalice flame to light our candles of community. We light our first candle as a blessing for the wider world. Our thoughts go out to all who are suffering as a result of climate change, injustice, and horrendous wars. We carry in our hearts, but that have not been spoken aloud, and we move into a time of silence. May the truth of your heart be reflected in these flames. Amen and blessed be. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. In the handshake of justice, roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit, come to me.
We will now expand our circle of care as we gratefully give and receive our Share the Plate offering to Makoche Ikichupi. This is one way we make our care for the world tangible. Will the ushers please come forward? I am so happy that we have John Stoesz with us today. He is a leader of a group called Repair Communities, which he will tell you about. He is firmly committed to Indigenous justice and to following Indigenous leadership on the path to decolonization. On up, John.
So my pronouns are he, him. And I am a white man, a white Minnesotan, just to be clear. I am not Dakota. So here is an outline of the presentation. Perhaps the most important thing is when we get to the last one, the challenge, you know that this is almost over. So let's start with just a bit of the historical context. I'm going to take a quote from a historian, Colin Woodard. This book, American Nations, is actually not about the indigenous nations, but he summarizes very beautifully the emerging consensus among scholars. Before contact, that is contact, European contact, indigenous peoples of the Americas had a standard of living far higher than that of their European counterparts. They tended to be healthier, better fed, and more secure, with better sanitation, healthcare, and nutrition. So let's begin to decolonize our minds a little bit and realize that that was the case. A little bit about my story. My hometown is Mountain Lake, Minnesota. Of course, there are no mountains in southwestern Minnesota. And what happened to the lake? The original lake was actually drained for farmland. And for about 30 years, there was no lake until the town fathers, and at that time they were all men, until the town fathers decided to dam up a creek and make the little lake that is there today. Near Mountain Lake, about 15 miles, are the Jeffers petroglyphs. These are more than 5,000 stone etchings or carvings in a rock outcropping. These are digitally enhanced, so you can actually see what some of the pictures there are. Going back, the earliest are estimated to be about 10,000 years old. So we know that there were indigenous people, ancestors of current day Dakota people in the Mountain Lake area 10,000 years ago. And there was an original village of Mountain Lake, don't know what it was called. This mountain, it's actually just a small hill, was the location of an indigenous village surrounded by a shallow lake. This is the one that was drained for farmland. Artifacts found by a 1976 archaeological survey date this village to about 500 BC. So there was a small village right where the town of Mountain Lake is today. Very important to my story is the 1851 Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, which is close to St. Peter. This treaty opened 24 million acres, so it is that gold-colored area on the map there, to white settlement through deception and military threat. This is called a treaty. It really was a land swindle. Dakota people lost most of their Minnesota homeland. In the return, they were promised food rations and money. They were promised $1,665,000. Well, the difference between what was promised and what was paid is immense. Scholars say that very little of that $1,665,000 was actually paid to Dakota people. What was paid went into white pockets, well-connected white pockets, and the Dakota probably received maybe 20,000 or less for 24 million acres. Much of the money was diverted to fur traders such as Henry Sibley and Alexander Ramsey, who you know as the first two governors of Minnesota. In 1862, Governor Alexander Ramsey, in a speech to the legislature, said, "The Sioux Indians, meaning the Dakota, must be exterminated or driven forever beyond the boundaries of the state." So this was state policy: extermination and removal and stolen land. And so in the 1860s, early 1860s, the Homestead Act was passed, and the railroads came through Minnesota, freeing up land and transportation to get to the land for thousands and then hundreds of thousands of European settlers coming to Minnesota. Some, of course, came before the Homestead Act, but my ancestors benefited from the Homestead Act and the railroad expansion. This actually was manifest destiny in action. The Homestead Act, the railroad expansion was, in my opinion, manifest destiny in action. And the land that I inherited was near Butterfield, Minnesota, which is close to Mountain Lake. 13 acres was my share of the inheritance from my grandparents' farm. In 2012, my family sold my grandparents' farm, and I decided to return half the proceeds from my share to indigenous groups working for land justice, most to Makoche Ikikchupi. The picture there is of Wazia Tui. Waz is the executive director of this organization. And you see they are a nonprofit group dedicated to land recovery, reconnecting Dakota people to the land and to their culture, and sustainable practices, living the ethic of all my relations. Everything is interrelated. And then in 2013, I did a 2,000-mile tricycle tour through Minnesota to raise awareness. So through most of southern Minnesota. At that point, I knew very little about the Twin Cities, so I didn't try going through the Twin Cities on my trike. I ride a trike because 20 years ago I had a cerebral hemorrhage, which is a kind of a stroke. And so I still have balance issues. And the nice thing about a trike is it's very hard to tip over. Before I started the tricycle tour, a couple of Dakota people from Makoche came down to Mountain Lake and did a little, I'll call it a commissioning kind of service in Dakota for me. And basically, and they translated into English for me, and my mother was there too for us, you know, what they were saying in Dakota. And basically they said, my role as a white Minnesotan is to raise awareness among other white people, to organize them, and to raise funds for the organization. So that's why I'm here. My role is not to organize Dakota people. They do that. It's not my role.
I like your travois too.
What's that?
I like your travois on the back of
Oh,
it.
yeah. Yeah, that's my camper. That's where I put my tent and my sleeping bag. So a timeline of the organization. In 2008, Wazia Tui published her book, What Does Justice Look Like? The Struggle for Liberation in Dakota Homeland in Minnesota. And in that book, she argued for land reparations. And the next year, in 2009, the Dakota Land Recovery Project was launched in the Twin Cities area with an Evening of Reparations fundraiser organized by settler solidarity activists who had read her book, and they contacted her and said, if we, descendants of the settlers, raise money for Makoche Ihichupi to buy back land, would that be justice? And Waz thought, and she said, yes, that would be justice. So that was the beginning of that organization. And white Minnesotans are making reparations in 5 ways. I talk about reparations as return of unjust benefit. So when I inherited money from land that was stolen, that was in large part unjust benefit for me. I'll pause and make three considerations I had in mind. One I will call the Zacchaeus principle. Those of you who have Christian background may recognize the name Zacchaeus as a Jewish tax collector, collecting taxes for the Roman military occupation of Palestine, who met Jesus and decided to follow the way of Jesus. And he decided to return half his wealth to the poor of Palestine. And I call this the Zacchaeus principle. If you benefit from an oppressive system and you decide to follow the love ethic of Jesus or some such ethic, then you must make amends to those oppressed by that system. So that principle continues to animate me. Second, I believe that it may be unrealistic to return all the land, but it's unjust to return none of the land. Then, corollary to that, then the question is not whether to return land, the question is how to do it. And I think Makoche Ihichupi provides a good way to return Dakota land, because we really can't decide on our own how to do that. We have to follow the leadership of Dakota people. Okay. 2015, Makoche received 501c3 nonprofit status and focused on 3 aspects: return of Dakota land, revitalization of Dakota culture, and renewal of the environment. So I started with the question, what does Dakota liberation look like? What does Dakota justice look like? Well, this is the answer from Dakota people. It looks like return of Dakota land. It looks like revitalization of Dakota culture. It looks like renewal of the environment. I studied, philosophical ethics for a long time, and I have never come across such a clear explanation of what justice looks like for certain people. And in 2019, Makoche purchased its first parcel of land, 21 acres in the Minnesota River Valley, that has been named Zani Otuwe, Village of Wellness. And they began building 3 Dakota earth lodges on that site, but were stopped by a Minnesota state inspector for violating Minnesota's building codes. And so this is what they built: the frame of an earth lodge and then were stopped there. So the organization and its allies lobbied the state legislature for 2 years to change the law. And in 2021, the legislation providing a waiver to Minnesota building codes for indigenous building practices was signed into law by Governor Walz. So this was 21 when that happened. So that's a picture of a Dakota Earth Lodge with a rainbow over it. Nice picture. And the first Earth Lodge was finished at the end of 2021. That is Waz standing in the doorway of that Earth Lodge. By 2025, the idea is to have 7 Earth Lodges constructed at this first village, Zaniotunwe. They have a permaculture design that they're implementing, and the hope is to have 6 Oceti Shakoi families, which means Dakota, Lakota, Nakota families, living at Zadi. By 2050, the vision is to have at least 10 village sites throughout Minnesota Makoche. These would be gardening and foraging lands, hunting lands, fishing and wild ricing lands, and sugar bush, maple syrup production lands. So living in a sustainable relationship with the land. And so we have started repair communities so white people can be engaged in supporting this work. We have 5 of them. Central Minnesota, which is Hutchinson-Wilmer area. Franciscan community of Little Falls, north of St. Cloud. Mountain Lake, southwestern Minnesota. Rochester area, and Twin Cities area. And Janet is a part of the Twin Cities group. She probably gets more emails from me than she wants. You'll probably get another one tomorrow. So by repair, we mean 3 things. Repair for stolen land, repair for destruction of Dakota culture, repair for environmental devastation. So we are engaged in 4 kinds of activities: volunteer work days when invited, reflection hours monthly, fundraising when asked, and legislative action. So this is what a volunteer workday looks like: scraping bark and putting the roof on a Dakota Earth Lodge, then which is completely covered with dirt, and then grass grows on it. So a completed Earth Lodge looks like this from the outside. You see the smoke pipe there from each one has a wood stove. And then there's a skylight in the middle there. And so this is what it looks like on the inside. So they're actually quite spacious on the inside. And the light there is all natural light through the sunlight. So they actually are brighter than you might imagine looking at them from the outside. Reflection hours are focused on the struggle against the structures of colonization. So we have identified the politics of colonization and land theft, the culture of colonization and the destruction of indigenous cultures, think of the boarding schools, the economics of colonization and environmental devastation. How are those 2 tied together? Well, if you go from thinking about land and water as relatives to thinking about land as economic commodity, then you're on the road to environmental devastation. And then fundraising, or return of unjust benefit. So we've raised more than $350,000 to help buy back land for their villages. So there's a second village underway in Mountain Lake called Hokwoju Otunwe, which means Village of Vibrant Growth. That's the picture of the greenhouse there. It's a part of that. It's about 20 acres also. And that will be gardening land, basically. Raising the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, as well as greens and tomatoes and other things. And then at the end of May, they obtained Prakashada Otunwe, Painted Turtle Village, which is on Turtle Lake in northern Minnesota in Itasca County. This will be a wild ricing and fishing village. So this is 40 acres that they obtained. So there are 3 villages underway now. And then finally, legislative action. So we are working on something in the Minnesota legislature called the Indian Recovery Act. The concept is a fund financed by a 0.05% surtax on all real estate transactions. That's 5/10,000ths of the sale amount. So that means if you sell a lot for $10,000, $5 goes into this fund for indigenous projects in Minnesota determined by indigenous people, not determined by the legislature, determined by a board of indigenous people. Potential yield would be $25 to $40 million a year, so it would be substantial. The beneficiaries would be any and all of Minnesota's Indian communities. So not only those that have reservations, including well, I won't get into reservations. You know, there are Ojibwe reservations and then 4 tiny Dakota reservations, very tiny. There's the quote by Vine Deloria Jr., reconciliation must be effected between the spiritual owner of the land, American Indians, and the political owner of the land, American whites. Where does that stand? Well, the group that's working on this, well, I'll go back a little bit. There are 2 parts of the legislation. One is the collection of the money, which is through this surtax on all real estate transactions, meaning sale of land or sale of buildings. Then there is the distribution of funds to be decided by a board of indigenous people. Well, how do you determine the composition of that board and what guidelines govern that? And one of the concerns that indigenous people have raised is we do not want to be in competition with each other for this money. So how do you structure that decision-making process in a way that is coherent with indigenous values? So that's where that stands. We are working with indigenous leaders to figure that out. In my mind, what we are trying to do is come about with an indigenous method for doing this in a colonized institution, the Minnesota State Legislature. That is not an easy proposition. So here's some highlights from the last couple of years. So there have been several gatherings of Oceti Shakowee people, Dakota Lakota people, at Zani Otunwe, the first village, 60 or 70 people at a time, to come see it and, experience it. First baby was born at Zani Otunwe, this first village, in the first Earth Lodge there, a couple of years ago in August. This was the first baby born in a Dakota Earth Lodge in Minnesota in more than 200 years. And so this is a very important milestone. It was an all Dakota birth, surrounded by a Dakota midwife, Dakota aunties and grandmother and so forth, and mother, of course. The males on the outside praying and singing. Acquired property for the second Dakota Village site. This is the property in Mountain Lake, which will be a food production site, or is now a food production site. This is a volunteer work and learn day at Hokuoju-Otunwe. This is the Mountain Lake site. Scraping bark for a Dakota Earth Lodge, and a plant walk with Linda Black Elk. So Linda is an ethnobotanist. And she studies cultural understandings and uses of relationships with plants, particularly indigenous and Lakota cultural understanding and relationship with plants. She is wonderful. And Makoche acquired the property for their third village, which is the Wild Ricing and Fishing Village that they just purchased at the end of May. Again, we help through the repair communities raising the money to make that happen. So this is the challenge. So each of these villages provides us with a glimpse of what Dakota justice looks like. But in each case, we're only talking about 20 acres or so. So they're just glimpses. We need to move toward justice in full. So that's the challenge. Part of that challenge is structural change, changing laws and policies. And here's a quotation from a Quaker activist, Paula Palmer. We find the roots of injustice in the doctrine of discovery. We find the seeds of hope in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. How can we make the basis of American or federal Indian law change that basis from the doctrine of discovery, which it is today, to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? That's a generations-long process to make that change, but it would have huge effects. So that's a whole other presentation. And also the challenge is cultural change. So you see here on one side, the painting by John Gast, American Progress from 1872. So you see the white angel named Columbia, of course, and the settlers proceeding from the light in the east, and the Indians and the buffalo forced to flee to the darkness in the west. This is the painting that was part of the culture that my ancestors came into, and probably bought into. This was American progress, chasing the Indians and the buffalo out so that the white people could use the land in a way that they saw best. And then there is a painting called Reversing Manifest Destiny, done by the indigenous painter Charles Hilliard in 2014, which shows an indigenous woman leading the way east with the Indians and buffalo, and also settlers following her toward the darkness from the light in the west toward the darkness in the east. The darkness is caused by pollution. So those are the challenges. Structural change and cultural change. These are the long-term changes that need to happen. And the goal is that indigenous babies will not be born into a situation of trauma. So recall that baby, Tawapaha Natanhan. He was the first Dakota baby born in a Dakota Earth Lodge in Minnesota in more than 200 years. He celebrated his second birthday in August. I think this picture was taken when he just turned 1 year old. So He was a little older now. So that's the end of the presentation. Hope it's helpful. Be happy to talk with you after the service, anyone who wants to chat. Thank you.
Very difficult to follow those thoughts, but we're going to try. The next reading we're going to do will be not a responsive reading, we're calling it Speaking Together. And it's long, so we'll sit. Well, we won't stand for that. It is a beautiful poem by Joy Harjo from her book, An American Sunrise, which is you can check it out after the service. I will read it's an insert in your bulletin. And I will read the words that are to the edge, and you read the indented, italicized ones. Let's try it. Bless This Land by Joy Harjo. Bless this land from the top of its head to the bottom of its feet.
From the Arctic old white head to the brown feet of tropical rain.
Bless the eyes of this land, for they witness cruelty and kindness in this land.
From sunrise light upright to falling down on your knees night.
Bless the ears of this land, for they hear cries of heartbreak and shouts of celebration in this land.
Once we heard no gunshot on these lands, the trees and stones can be heard singing.
Bless the mouth, lips, and speech of this land, for the land is a speaker, a singer, a keeper of all that happens here on this land.
Luminous forests, oceans, and rock cliffs sold for the trash what of gold, uranium, or oil bust rush, yet there are new stories to be made, little ones coming up over the horizon.
Bless the arms and hands of this land, for they remake and restore beauty in this land.
We are held in the circle around these lands by song, and reminded by the knowers that no one is over the other. No human above the bird, no bird above the insect, no wind above the grass.
Bless the heart of this land on its knees, planting food beneath the internal circle of breathing, swimming, and walking this land.
The heart is a poetry maker. There is one heart, says a poetry maker, one body, and all poems make one poem, and we do not use words to make war on this land.
Bless the gut labyrinth of this land, for it is the center of unknowing in this land. Bless the femaleness and maleness of this land, for each holds the fluent power of becoming in this land.
When it was decided to be in this manner here in this place, this land, all the birds made a birdly racket from the indigo sky holds.
Bless the 2 legs and 2 feet of this land, for the sacred always walks beside the profane in this land.
These words walk the backbone of this land, massaging the tissue around the cord of life, which is the tree of life, upon which this land stands.
Bless the destruction of this land, for new shoots will rise up from fire, floods, earthquakes, and fierce winds to make new this land.
We are land on turtle's back. When the weight of greed overturns us, who will recall the upright song of this land?
Bless the creation of new land, for out of chaos we will be compelled to remember to bless this land.
The smallest one remembered, the most humble one, the one whose voice you have to lean in 1,000 years to hear. We will begin there.
Bless us, these lands, said the rememberer. These lands aren't our lands. These lands aren't your lands. We are this land.
The closing words today are by L.R. Nost. The broken world awaits. Do not be dismayed by the brokenness of the world. All things break, and all things can be mended. Not with time, as they say, but with intention. So go, love intentionally, extravagantly, unconditionally. The broken world waits in darkness for the light that is you. Now we join in the words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please rise in body or spirit, and with your hands over your heart or holding a hand of those next to you, or whatever posture is most comfortable to you, we sing the words of blessing one to another.